The fluorescent lights of the courthouse hallway cast harsh shadows across my face as I adjusted my press badge for the third time in as many minutes. My fingers trembled slightly, though whether from exhaustion or adrenaline I couldn't say. 26 hours I'd been awake, surviving on black coffee and the kind of righteous fury that had fueled my journalism career for the past 5 years. But this wasn't just another corrupt politician or corporate scandal. This was Anthony Rossini, the ghost who operated in Manhattan's shadows, the man whose name made even hardened detectives lower their voices. I pressed my recorder closer to my chest, feeling its solid weight through my blazer. The device contained 3 months of investigation, countless interviews with witnesses too terrified to go on record, financial documents that had cost me a source's trust to obtain, everything I needed to finally expose the truth about the Rossini crime family's stranglehold on the city's port district. Ms. Hayes, you really shouldn't be here. Detective Marcus Chen appeared at my elbow, his weathered face creased with concern. He'd been one of my few allies in the NYPD, feeding me scraps of information when he could, though always with the caveat that his hands were tied by politics and fear. Public courthouse, public proceedings, I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the way my heart hammered against my ribs. First Amendment, remember? Rossini's lawyers are going to bury this case before lunch, Chen muttered, glancing toward the courtroom doors. And you've made yourself a very visible target. He doesn't forget faces, Violet, especially not ones that cost him money or reputation. I knew he was right. Every journalist in the city knew the stories, whispered over drinks at press bars. The reporter who'd gotten too close to the Rossini gambling operations and suddenly found himself accused of fabricating sources, his career destroyed. The photographer who'd captured compromising images and had his camera shop burned down. The blogger who'd connected Rossini to a series of disappearances and then disappeared herself, only to resurface 3 states away, hollow-eyed, and refusing to speak about what had happened. But I'd spent my entire life being told what I shouldn't do, where I shouldn't go, who I shouldn't challenge. Growing up in South Boston with a single mother who cleaned houses for the wealthy families on Beacon Hill, I'd learned early that the world was divided between those who made the rules and those who suffered under them. My mother had taught me to bow my head and accept my place. I'd learned instead to look power in the eye and demand answers. "He's coming out," someone whispered, and the cluster of reporters and curious onlookers pressed closer to the courtroom doors. The doors swung open with a heavy, decisive thud that seemed to echo through the marble hallway. First came his lawyers, 3 men in suits that probably cost more than my annual salary, their expressions a mixture of smug satisfaction and barely concealed contempt for the press gathered like scavengers. Then his security detail, 4 men, whose eyes constantly scanned the crowd with the kind of professional vigilance that spoke of military training and absolute loyalty. And then Anthony Rossini himself stepped into the hallway, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. He was taller than I'd expected, probably 6'3", with the kind of presence that made everyone instinctively create space around him. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored to emphasize broad shoulders and a lean, powerful frame. Dark hair swept back from a face that magazines would call classically handsome, all sharp angles and Mediterranean heritage, but it was his eyes that made my breath catch. Storm gray and utterly cold, they swept across the gathered crowd with the casual assessment of a predator deciding which prey might be worth his attention. Those eyes found me, and for a heartbeat, everything else fell away. The noise of the courthouse, the jostling reporters, the flash of cameras, all of it faded into background static. Something in his gaze sharpened, recognition or perhaps calculation, and I felt the weight of his attention like a physical touch. I'd been observed before, assessed by powerful men who saw me as either a threat or an inconvenience. But this was different. This was being seen by someone who understood exactly what I represented and had already begun planning how to neutralize me. "Mr. Rossini, can you comment on the judge's decision to dismiss the charges?" A reporter from the Times called out, breaking the spell. Rossini's attorney stepped forward with practiced smoothness. My client is pleased that justice has prevailed. These baseless accusations were nothing more than baseless. The word burst from my lips before I could stop it, sharp and accusatory in the marble corridor. Your client owns shell companies linked to 12 different money laundering operations. His name appears in documents connected to 3 murders. The only thing baseless here is the claim that he's innocent. The hallway went silent. Even the other reporters, used to aggressive questioning, took a collective step back. You didn't call out Anthony Rossini. Not directly. Not unless you were ready to face the consequences. Rossini raised a hand, silencing his attorney before the man could respond. His eyes never left mine as he spoke, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that somehow carried perfectly through the quiet space. And you are? He asked it mildly, as if genuinely curious, but there was steel beneath the velvet. Violet Hayes, investigative journalist. I forced myself to meet his gaze, to keep my voice steady. And I've been documenting your criminal enterprise for 3 months. Your lawyers may have gotten you off today, but the truth will come out. Something flickered across his face, too quick to identify. Amusement? Anger? Interest? His lips curved into what might have been a smile if smiles could hold edges sharp enough to cut. Ms. Hayes. He said my name like he was tasting it, memorizing its shape. You make very serious allegations. I assume you have evidence to support such claims? I have financial records, witness testimony, shipping manifests that... Witness testimony from whom? He took a step toward me, and despite the space between us, I felt the full force of his attention focus like a laser. Let me guess. Disgruntled former employees? People with grudges? Criminals looking to reduce their own sentences? People brave enough to speak the truth, I countered, my hand tightening on my recorder. Unlike most of the city, they're not intimidated by your reputation. Brave. He repeated the word softly, thoughtfully. Is that what you call it? I've always found that bravery and foolishness look remarkably similar from certain angles. The threat was implicit, wrapped in civilized language, but unmistakable in its intent. His security detail had shifted position, I noticed, creating a subtle barrier between us and any easy exit. The other reporters were backing away, sensing the dangerous turn the confrontation had taken. Are you threatening me, Mr. Rossini? I asked, pitching my voice loud enough that it would carry, that every recorder and camera would catch it. Here, in a public courthouse, surrounded by witnesses. His smile widened, and for the first time I saw genuine emotion in those gray eyes. Not anger, as I'd expected, but something far more unsettling. Appreciation. As if I'd just done something unexpectedly entertaining. Threaten you? Ms. Hayes, you misunderstand me entirely. He took another step closer, near enough now that I could smell his cologne, something expensive with notes of cedar and leather. I'm simply pointing out that crusading journalists often discover that their causes aren't as righteous as they appear. Sources lie. Evidence gets fabricated. Reputations get destroyed. My reputation is built on truth, I said, refusing to back down even as my survival instincts screamed at me to run. And the truth about you is going to be published whether you like it or not. Truth. He seemed to turn the word over, examining it from all angles. Such a relative concept. But if you're so certain of your truth, Ms. Hayes, then by all means, publish it. I look forward to reading your work. He turned to leave, his security detail moving with him, but paused after just 2 steps. When he looked back at me, the amusement had drained from his expression, replaced by something cold and absolute. A word of advice, though. Be very careful about the stones you throw, especially when you live in a house made of such fragile glass. With that cryptic warning, He swept past me, his entourage following like shadows. The hallway erupted in chaos as reporters surged forward, shouting questions that went unanswered. But I remained frozen where I stood, his words echoing in my mind. House made of fragile glass. What did he know? Or more accurately, what had he discovered? Violet, are you insane? My colleague Sarah grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with fear and disbelief. Do you have any idea what you just did? Rossini doesn't forget. He doesn't forgive. You basically painted a target on your back in front of half the city's press corps. I knew she was right. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to back off, to let someone else chase this story. But I'd spent 3 months building this case. 3 months interviewing witnesses who'd risked everything to talk to me. 3 months documenting a criminal empire that operated with impunity because everyone was too terrified to challenge it. I did my job, I said quietly, watching Rossini's broad shoulders disappear around the corner. Someone has to. What I didn't say, what I couldn't admit even to myself, was that something in that brief confrontation had shaken me more than any threat could have. It wasn't fear, though God knows I should have been afraid. It was the way he'd looked at me, with that sharp intelligence and cold calculation. The way he'd recognized immediately that I wasn't going to back down, and instead of anger, he'd shown interest. Like I was a problem worth solving, or a challenge worth accepting. The subway ride back to my apartment in Brooklyn felt longer than usual. Every passenger a potential threat. Every lingering glance a reminder of how exposed I'd made myself. The confrontation with Rossini played on an endless loop in my mind, his words dissecting themselves into increasingly ominous interpretations. Be very careful about the stones you throw, especially when you live in a house made of such fragile glass. What did he know about me? I'd been careful, covering my tracks, using encrypted communications with my sources. But men like Anthony Rossini didn't make idle threats or speak in metaphors without purpose. Every word was calculated, designed to unsettle and intimidate. My phone buzzed insistently in my pocket. I pulled it out to find 17 missed calls, most from numbers I didn't recognize, and a string of text messages from Sarah. Call me, now. Violet, seriously, pick up. The office is going crazy. Mason wants to see you immediately. Richard Mason, my editor at the New York Tribune, was not going to be happy. He'd been cautious about the Rossini investigation from the beginning, warning me repeatedly about the risks of going after someone so connected, so powerful. My very public confrontation at the courthouse would have reached him within minutes. I emerged from the subway into the gray afternoon light of my neighborhood, a gentrifying area of Brooklyn, where old Italian bakeries sat uneasily next to artisanal coffee shops. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Paid for by freelance work and the occasional big story. The street seemed quieter than usual. I noticed it immediately. That subtle wrongness that came from years of paying attention to details others missed. The bodega owner who usually sat outside his shop was absent. The group of teenagers who typically congregated on the corner had vanished. Even the ever-present background noise of traffic seemed muted. My hand found the pepper spray in my purse, fingers curling around its familiar shape as I approached my building. The front door, which required a key code, stood slightly ajar. The security camera above it had been spray-painted over, a fresh black coating still dripping down the brick. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to call the police, to do anything except walk through that door. But my laptop was upstairs, containing all my research, backed up files, encrypted communications with sources. If someone was inside, if Rossini's people had come for my evidence, I couldn't just let them take it. I pulled out my phone, fingers hovering over 911, ready to press if I heard anything suspicious. The stairwell was empty, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead with their usual irregular flicker. Each step seemed to echo too loudly in the concrete space. My apartment door was closed, but not locked. I knew because the deadbolt I always engaged was turned to the open position, visible even from the hallway. Someone had been inside. Someone might still be inside. This time I did call 911, keeping my voice low as I reported a break-in, gave my address, and then did something monumentally stupid. I pushed the door open. The apartment looked exactly as I'd left it that morning. My coffee mug still sat on the kitchen counter, half full, and certainly cold by now. My laptop remained on the small dining table I used as a desk, surrounded by the organized chaos of my research. Nothing appeared disturbed or stolen, but someone had definitely been here. I could smell it, a faint trace of expensive cologne that didn't belong, the same cedar and leather scent that had surrounded Anthony Rossini in the courthouse hallway. My hands shook as I checked my laptop, booting it up to see if anything had been accessed or deleted. While it loaded, I moved through the apartment with growing dread, checking closets and under the bed like a child afraid of monsters. Except the monsters I feared were very real and had already demonstrated their ability to penetrate my sanctuary. The laptop screen illuminated, asking for my password. I typed it in with trembling fingers, pulling up my encrypted files. Everything seemed intact, all my documents present and unaltered. But that almost made it worse. If they hadn't come to steal or destroy my evidence, why break in at all? The answer came when I opened my primary investigation file, the master document containing 3 months of work. A new folder had been created, titled simply, Violet Hayes. My stomach dropped. I clicked it open. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Me leaving my apartment at various times over the past 3 months. Me meeting with sources in supposedly discreet locations. Me at the library, at coffee shops, at the courthouse today. Every movement I'd made, every person I'd contacted, documented with professional precision. But it wasn't just surveillance photos. There were documents too. My credit report, showing the student loan debt I was still drowning under. My mother's medical records from her treatment for breast cancer 2 years ago. The bills I'd helped her pay. My personnel file from the Tribune, including Mason's notes about my aggressive reporting style and difficulty following editorial guidance. They'd compiled a complete dossier on my life, my vulnerabilities, my pressure points. And they'd left it for me to find, a message as clear as if Rossini had stood in my apartment and spoken it aloud. I know everything about you. You have no secrets from me. You have no safety. The knock on my door made me jump, nearly dropping the laptop. NYPD, responding to a 911 call, a male voice announced. I stumbled to the door, checking through the peephole to verify the uniforms before opening it. 2 officers stood in the hallway, one older with gray threading through his dark hair, the younger one barely out of the academy by the look of him. Ms. Hayes, you reported a break-in? The older officer asked, his eyes already scanning past me into the apartment. I explained about the open front door, the unlocked apartment, the feeling that someone had been inside. I didn't mention the files on my computer or who I suspected was responsible. Some things the police couldn't help with, especially when half the department was rumored to be on Rossini's payroll. The officers did a cursory check of the apartment, examined the door frame for signs of forced entry, and took notes with the kind of professional detachment that made it clear they'd seen this 100 times before. Nothing had been stolen, nothing visibly damaged. They'd file a report, they said. Someone from the detective unit might follow up. We all knew no one would. After they left, I sat on my couch with my laptop, staring at the folder that shouldn't exist. I should delete it, I knew. Pretend I'd never seen it, never understood how thoroughly I'd been watched and cataloged. But my fingers wouldn't cooperate, instead clicking through file after file, each one a fresh violation. There was a video file at the bottom of the folder. Against every instinct of self-preservation, I clicked it. The video was shot from inside a car. The camera focused on a modest house in a suburban neighborhood I recognized immediately. My mother's home in Connecticut, where she'd moved after my father's death to be closer to her sister. The footage was recent, from this morning judging by the date stamp in the corner. My mother appeared in the frame, stepping out her front door with her gardening basket, her movement still slightly stiff from the lingering effects of her cancer treatment. She looked healthy, happy, completely unaware of the lens watching her every move. The video ended after 30 seconds, but the message was devastating in its clarity. I could write my story, publish my investigation, expose whatever truths I'd uncovered about Anthony Rossini. But he could reach my mother. He could reach anyone I cared about. And he wanted me to know it. My phone rang, an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up, press the device to my ear with a hand that had gone numb. Ms. Hayes. That voice, smooth and dangerous, filled my ear like poisoned honey. I trust you found my gift. You broke into my home, I said, forcing the words past the tightness in my throat. That's a crime, is it? He sounded genuinely curious, as if we were discussing philosophy rather than felony breaking and entering. I have no idea what you're talking about. I've been in meetings all afternoon. At least a dozen witnesses can confirm it. Of course he had an alibi. Men like Rossini always did. What do you want? I asked, abandoning any pretense. Want? I want you to understand the reality of your situation, Violet. May I call you Violet? Ms. Hayes seems so formal for people who've shared such an intimate moment. The way he said my name made my skin crawl. Or perhaps it was something else. Some treacherous part of me that responded to the dark seduction in his voice. I crushed that thought immediately. You've been playing at journalism, thinking you can expose the big bad criminal without consequences, he continued, his tone shifting to something harder. But you're not untouchable, Violet. Your mother certainly isn't. Nor is that college friend of yours, Emily Chen, the one you have lunch with every Tuesday. Or your editor, Mason, who has a teenage daughter with a very expensive drug problem he thinks no one knows about. Each name landed like a physical blow. He'd mapped my entire life, identified everyone who mattered to me, cataloged them like potential hostages. You're threatening innocent people, I said, hating how my voice shook. People who have nothing to do with your crimes. I'm not threatening anyone, he replied smoothly. I'm simply pointing out how interconnected our lives are. How one person's crusade can have ripple effects they never anticipated. Your story gets published. Certain people might become very interested in, say, how your mother paid for her cancer treatment when her insurance had lapsed. Or they might wonder about those student loans of yours, the ones you've been struggling with for years. So many vulnerabilities, Violet. So much fragile glass. Are you trying to buy me off? I asked, anger finally cutting through fear. Because I'm not for sale. His laugh was low and rich, genuinely amused. Buy you? No, Violet. I don't need to buy you. I simply need you to understand that you're playing a game with rules you don't comprehend and stakes you can't afford. Then why not just kill me? The words came out harder than intended, but I was beyond caring. Isn't that what men like you do? Eliminate problems? The silence that followed stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed, dropped to something dangerously soft. Men like me, he repeated. You have no idea what kind of man I am, Violet, but you're about to learn. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I sat in my apartment as darkness fell outside, the laptop screen casting its glow across my face, the files of my violated privacy still open before me. I should call someone, should reach out to Sarah or Mason or Detective Chen. But what would I say? That I'd confronted a mob boss and now he was threatening me? They'd tell me to drop the story, to protect myself, to let someone else chase this particular dragon. The smart thing would be to walk away. Rossini had shown me the depth of his reach, the vulnerability of everyone I cared about. Publishing my investigation would put them all at risk for a story that might not even stick. His lawyers had already gotten him off once. What made me think a newspaper article would accomplish what prosecutors couldn't? But walking away meant letting him win. It meant accepting that people like Rossini could operate with impunity, that power and fear trumped truth and justice. It meant becoming another journalist who'd been silenced, another voice that had chosen safety over conviction. I opened a new document on my laptop and began to type, my fingers moving with increasing certainty across the keyboard. If Rossini wanted to play games, if he wanted to demonstrate his power and reach, fine. But I wouldn't be intimidated into silence. I'd just be smarter about it. The article I wrote that night wasn't the exposé I'd originally planned. Instead, I crafted something more subtle, more strategic. I detailed the courthouse confrontation, portrayed Rossini as a man so powerful that he could make criminal charges disappear, included quotes from anonymous sources about the climate of fear that surrounded his name. I didn't make direct accusations I couldn't prove. I simply painted a picture and let readers draw their own conclusions. It was past midnight when I finally sent the draft to Mason with a note. Ready to publish. This is the story that needs to be told. His response came within minutes despite the late hour. My office, 9 a.m. Don't be late. I knew what that meeting would bring. Pushback, caution, probably an outright refusal to run the story. But I'd made my choice in that courthouse hallway, when I'd looked into Anthony Rossini's cold gray eyes and refused to look away. Sleep was impossible. I lay in my bed, fully clothed, my phone charging on the nightstand and the pepper spray within easy reach. Every sound in the building made me tense, every creak of old pipes or footstep in the hallway above setting my nerves on edge. It was during one of these hyper-vigilant moments, around 3 a.m, that I heard it. A soft scraping sound at my door, metal on metal, the unmistakable sound of someone manipulating the lock. I grabbed my phone, finger hovering over 911, but something made me pause. The lock clicked open with professional efficiency, and the door swung inward slowly, revealing a figure silhouetted against the dim hallway light. Not Rossini. Too short, too slight. The figure stepped into my apartment, and in the ambient light from outside, I could finally make out features. A woman, probably in her 30s, dressed entirely in black with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Don't scream," she said quietly, her hands raised to show they were empty. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to warn you." "Warn me?" I whispered, not lowering my phone. "About what?" The woman glanced behind her, checking the hallway, then closed the door with a soft click. "About what you've gotten yourself into. About who Anthony Rossini really is and what he's capable of." She moved closer, and I could see her face more clearly now. Pretty, but hard, with the kind of wariness that came from surviving things most people couldn't imagine. "My name is Isabella," she said. "And 3 years ago, I made the same mistake you're making now. I thought I could expose him, thought I could bring him down." She pulled back her sleeve, revealing a network of scars along her inner arm. "This is what happens to people who threaten Anthony Rossini. If you're lucky." My mouth went dry. "Who are you?" "Someone who got away," she said simply. "Barely. And someone who's watched him destroy a dozen others who weren't as fortunate." She moved to my window, peering out at the street below. "He's not just watching you, Violet. He's hunting you. And when he decides the game has gone on long enough, he'll strike. You won't see it coming, and by the time you understand what's happening, it'll be too late." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Why risk coming here if he's so dangerous?" Isabella turned from the window, and in the dim light, I could see the haunted look in her eyes. "Because I can't save everyone he destroys. But maybe I can save you. Drop the story, leave the city, change your name, do whatever it takes to get off his radar." "I can't just—" "You can," she interrupted fiercely. "And you must. You think you're brave? You're not. You're naive. Rossini doesn't just threaten people, Violet. He breaks them. He finds what they love most and destroys it in front of them. He makes them watch while everything they care about crumbles, and then, when they have nothing left, that's when he decides whether they live or die. The conviction in her voice, the raw terror barely suppressed, made my blood run cold. This wasn't the abstract fear of a powerful criminal. This was the specific, visceral knowledge of what Anthony Rossini was capable of when someone pushed too far. "What did he do to you?" I asked softly. Isabella's expression shuddered, walls slamming down behind her eyes. "Things I'll never speak about, not even to save you." She moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. "I've done what I can. The rest is up to you. But understand this. Anthony Rossini always wins. Always. The only question is how much you'll lose before you accept it." Then she was gone, slipping out into the hallway as silently as she'd arrived, leaving me alone with my laptop, my investigation, and the growing certainty that I'd stepped into something far more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. The morning sun streaming through Mason's office window felt accusatory, illuminating the deep circles under my eyes and the coffee-stained blouse I'd thrown on in my haste to make the 9 o'clock meeting. I'd managed maybe 2 hours of fitful sleep after Isabella's midnight visit, my mind churning through everything she'd said, everything Rossini had implied, every possible path forward that didn't end in disaster. Mason sat behind his desk, my article pulled up on his computer screen, his expression grave. He was in his mid-50s, a veteran of the newspaper industry who'd survived 3 rounds of layoffs and the slow death of print journalism through sheer stubborn competence. His gray hair was perpetually disheveled, his tie always slightly askew, but his editorial judgment was razor-sharp. "Violet," he began, then paused, seeming to search for words. "This article is good, really good. You've documented a pattern of judicial corruption, intimidation, and systematic abuse of power that should absolutely be published." I felt a flicker of hope, quickly extinguished by his next words. "But it won't be. Not by this paper. Not with my signature on it. Mason, please. Do you have any idea what happened after your little courthouse performance yesterday?" He turned his monitor toward me, pulling up a series of emails. 3 major advertisers called to express concerns about our editorial direction. The publisher received a visit from someone representing the Rossi Family Foundation, suggesting that our ongoing partnership might need to be reevaluated, and I got a phone call from a very polite lawyer explaining how defamation lawsuits work. "Everything in that article is true," I protested. "Verifiable fact. There's no defamation." "Truth is a defense in court," Mason agreed. "But court costs money. Money this paper doesn't have, not for a protracted legal battle against someone with Rossini's resources. And that's assuming we even make it to court before other pressures shut us down." I slumped in my chair, feeling the walls closing in. "So that's it? We just let him win?" Mason's expression softened slightly. "Violet, I've been in this business 30 years. I've seen good journalists destroy their lives chasing stories that weren't worth the price. Rossini isn't just another corrupt businessman. He's something else. Something more dangerous. His money launderers move over $200 million annually through shell companies in the Cayman Islands," I said, pulling up figures from memory. "His organization controls the port district, dictating which shipments come through and extracting protection money from every business within a 10-block radius. 3 people who were prepared to testify against him have disappeared in the past 2 years. This story is absolutely worth the price." "Even if that price is your life?" Mason asked quietly. "Your mother's life? Because that's what we're talking about here, Violet. Not theoretical consequences, but real, immediate danger." The fact that he knew about the threats to my mother meant word had spread, probably through Detective Chen or another police contact. The violation of my home, the surveillance, the explicit warnings, all of it had made its way through the network of people who paid attention to such things. If I back down now, I'm proving that his system works, I said, hating how my voice wavered. That fear and intimidation are effective tools. That journalists can be silenced. Mason stood, moving to the window that overlooked the newsroom. You want to know what I think? I think you're brave and principled and absolutely right about everything you've uncovered. I also think you're going to get yourself killed, and probably take others down with you. So here's what's going to happen. You're taking a leave of absence. Paid. 2 months. Go visit your mother. Leave the city. Let things cool down. I'm not running away. You're making a strategic retreat, he corrected. There's a difference. Rossini has made his point. He's demonstrated his reach. If you drop this now, there's a chance he'll lose interest, move on to other concerns. If you keep pushing. He trailed off, the implication clear. I wanted to argue, to insist that I wouldn't be intimidated, that my principles mattered more than my safety. But Isabella's haunted eyes kept flashing through my mind, and the video of my mother in her garden, and the comprehensive dossier documenting every vulnerability in my life. Can I think about it? I asked finally. Mason turned from the window, his expression a mixture of relief and concern. You have until end of day. But Violet, really think about it. Because once you make this choice, there's no going back. I left his office in a daze, navigating through the newsroom on autopilot. My desk was in the back corner, surrounded by filing cabinets and the constant hum of the aging air conditioning system. Someone had left a package on my chair, a small box wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address. Every instinct screamed at me not to touch it. After everything that had happened in the past 24 hours, an anonymous package was almost certainly not good news. But I couldn't just leave it there. Couldn't call the police without looking paranoid or insane. With trembling hands, I carefully unwrapped the paper. Inside was a simple white box, the kind jewelry might come in. I lifted the lid slowly, half expecting something horrible, some grotesque threat or warning. Instead, I found a flash drive and a handwritten note on expensive cardstock. Violet, we should talk. Somewhere private. The coffee shop on the corner of 5th and Morrison. Noon today. Come alone. A.R. The flash drive was unmarked, but I knew with certainty what it would contain. More evidence of his reach, perhaps, or additional threats. A demonstration of power wrapped in the pretense of civility. I should throw it away. Should report it to Mason or the police. Should do anything except show up at that coffee shop to meet with a man who'd made it abundantly clear he could destroy me whenever he chose. But I'd also spent 3 months building a case against him. 3 months trying to understand how his empire functioned and what made him untouchable. And now he was offering me direct access, a chance to hear his perspective, or perhaps negotiate terms. It was reckless and dangerous, and probably exactly what he wanted. I plugged the flash drive into my computer. The single file it contained was a video, shot with professional quality in what looked like a private office. Anthony Rossini sat behind a massive desk, his charcoal suit perfectly tailored, his expression calm and composed. He looked directly at the camera, directly at me, with those penetrating gray eyes. Violet, he began, his voice smooth and controlled. By now you've received my invitation. I imagine you're debating whether to accept, weighing the risks against your journalistic curiosity. Let me make the decision easier. He picked up a folder from his desk, opening it to reveal what looked like photographs. These are surveillance photos taken this morning outside your mother's home in Connecticut. You'll notice the timestamp. You'll also notice the 3 different angles, indicating multiple watchers. He set the folder down, his expression never changing. I'm not showing you this to frighten you, though I imagine that's the effect. I'm showing you so you understand that I'm always several steps ahead. My hands clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms. But I'm also showing you this as a gesture of good faith, he continued. I could have had those men knock on your mother's door. Could have sent her a message that would have brought you running back to Connecticut, abandoning your crusade. I didn't. Because despite what you think of me, I'm not interested in terrorizing elderly women with cancer histories. He leaned forward slightly, his intensity increasing. What I am interested in is having a conversation with you, Violet Hayes. You've demonstrated courage, intelligence, and an admirable unwillingness to back down. Those are qualities I respect. So I'm extending an offer that I rarely make, a chance to understand my perspective before you make decisions that can't be unmade. The video ended abruptly, leaving me staring at the frozen image of his face. I should delete it. Should tell Mason about this latest contact. Should do the smart, safe thing and take the leave of absence. Get out of the city. Let someone else worry about Anthony Rossini and his criminal empire. Instead, at 11:30, I found myself walking toward 5th and Morrison, my pepper spray in one pocket, my phone recording in the other, my heart hammering against my ribs with every step. The coffee shop was one of those aggressively hip Brooklyn establishments, all exposed brick and reclaimed wood, with a chalkboard menu advertising drinks with names like The Hipster's Dilemma and Existential Espresso. It was busy with the lunch crowd, which I supposed was the point. Public enough to feel safe, crowded enough that anything untoward would have witnesses. Rossini sat at a corner table, positioned so his back was to the wall, and he had a clear view of the entrance. He wasn't alone. 2 of his security detail occupied a nearby table, their eyes constantly scanning the room. But the chair across from him was empty, waiting. He saw me immediately, his expression unreadable as he watched me navigate through the crowded space. He stood as I approached, a gesture of old-world courtesy that seemed absurd under the circumstances. "Violet," he said, gesturing to the chair. "Thank you for coming." "I shouldn't be here," I replied, remaining standing. "This is insane." "Perhaps," he agreed. "But you came anyway. Please, sit. I've taken the liberty of ordering you a coffee. Latte, extra shot, no sugar. I hope that's correct." The fact that he knew my coffee order sent a fresh chill down my spine. "You've been watching me that closely?" "I make it a point to know the people who interest me," he said simply. "And you, Violet Hayes, are exceptionally interesting." I sat, if only because standing made me feel more conspicuous. The coffee was exactly as he'd described, perfectly prepared, which somehow made everything worse. This man who I'd spent months investigating, who I'd publicly confronted just yesterday, knew intimate details of my daily life. "Why am I here?" I asked, wrapping my hands around the cup for something to do. "What could you possibly say that would change anything?" Rossini leaned back in his chair, completely at ease. "I want to tell you a story. About a boy who grew up in Brooklyn, son of immigrants who owned a restaurant. A boy who watched his parents work 18-hour days to keep that restaurant running, who saw them pay protection money to neighborhood thugs, who understood from a very young age that the world was divided between those with power and those without it." "Is this supposed to make me sympathetic?" I interrupted. "The tragic origin story of a criminal?" "It's supposed to give you context," he replied, unperturbed by my hostility. "That boy's father refused to pay 1 month, said he couldn't afford it, that the family needed the money more than the gangsters did. You know what happened?" I didn't answer, but he continued anyway. "They burned the restaurant down, with his father inside. The official report called it an electrical fire, an accident. Everyone in the neighborhood knew better." His gray eyes held mine, and for the first time, I saw something beyond cold calculation. Pain, maybe, or the memory of it. The boy was 12 years old. He and his mother were left with nothing but debt, and the understanding that powerlessness meant victimhood. "So you became exactly like the men who destroyed your family?" I asked. "That's your justification?" "I became powerful," he corrected. "I learned the rules of the game and played it better than anyone else. And yes, sometimes that means doing things that look criminal from the outside. But I don't prey on innocent people, Violet. I don't burn down family restaurants or terrorize hardworking immigrants. I protect them. For a price." "Everything has a price," he agreed. "The question is whether the price is fair and whether the protection is real. My businesses employ 3,000 people in this city. The neighborhoods under my influence have the lowest crime rates in Brooklyn. The shipments that come through my port create jobs and economic activity that benefit countless families." "And the people who oppose you?" I challenged. "The ones who disappear? What about them?" His expression hardened. "I don't tolerate threats to my organization or my people. If someone tries to destroy what I've built, yes, there are consequences. But I'm not the monster you've constructed in your articles, Violet. I'm a businessman operating in an imperfect world with imperfect methods." "You broke into my home," I said quietly. "You threatened my mother. You've turned my life into a nightmare because I dared to report the truth about your operations. That sounds pretty monstrous to me." Rossini was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming thoughtfully on the table. "The files in your apartment, the surveillance photos, even the visit to your mother's house. All of that was a demonstration. A message to help you understand the reality of your situation. A threat. A warning," he corrected. "There's a difference. A threat implies intent to harm. A warning implies a desire to prevent harm." He leaned forward, his intensity ratcheting up. "You confronted me publicly, Violet. You painted me as a criminal in front of the press, connected my name to murders and money laundering. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences? That I would simply ignore such a direct challenge?" "I was doing my job. And I'm doing mine," he replied. "Which includes protecting my reputation, my business interests, and my position in this city. Your article, if published, would damage all of those things. So I demonstrated that I could damage yours in return. Mutually assured destruction, if you will." "So this is a negotiation," I said slowly, understanding dawning. "You show me that you could hurt me, and now you're offering. What? A deal?" His smile was slight but genuine. "Now you're thinking strategically." "Yes, Violet, this is a negotiation. You have information about my operations, documented evidence that could cause problems even if it wouldn't lead to criminal charges. I have information about you, leverage that could destroy your career and endanger people you care about. The question is, how do we both walk away from this without mutually assured destruction?" I should have been outraged, should have thrown the coffee in his face and walked out. But he was right about one thing. I was thinking strategically now. And strategically, this conversation was more valuable than anything I could have uncovered through investigation. "What are you proposing?" I asked carefully. "You drop the story about me. Completely. No articles, no exposés, no more public confrontations. In exchange, I'll ensure that your mother remains safe, that your career remains intact, and that you're able to continue your journalism without interference." "You mean without investigating you?" "I mean without making me your primary focus," he clarified. "There are plenty of corrupt politicians and corporate criminals deserving of your attention. Chase those stories. Build your reputation. I won't stand in your way. As long as I leave you alone." "Exactly." I studied him across the table, this man who'd spent a day demonstrating his absolute power over my life. He looked relaxed, confident, certain that I would accept his terms, because what choice did I have? Everyone I'd talked to, Mason, Detective Chen, even Isabella, had told me the same thing. Anthony Rossini always wins. "And if I refuse?" I asked. "If I publish anyway?" His expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Then we both lose, Violet. You lose your safety, your mother's safety, possibly your life. I lose some reputation, face some inconvenient questions, and spend resources managing the fallout. But here's the thing. I can afford to lose what I'd lose. Can you? The honest answer was no. I couldn't afford to risk my mother's safety for a story, no matter how important. I couldn't put my friends and colleagues in danger because of my principles. The smart choice, the only choice really, was to accept his terms and walk away. But something in me rebelled against that calculation. Something that remembered why I'd become a journalist in the first place. To speak truth to power, to give voice to those who couldn't defend themselves, to refuse to be intimidated by people who thought their wealth and influence put them above consequences. I need time to think, I said finally. Rossini nodded, as if he'd expected this response. Of course. But Violet, don't take too long. My patience, while considerable, is not infinite. And there are others in my organization who are less diplomatic than I am. I've kept them at bay so far because I find you intriguing. But if you continue to be a threat, even I won't be able to protect you from certain consequences. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease. I'll be in touch in 3 days. That should give you sufficient time to make the rational choice. He walked away without waiting for a response, his security detail falling in behind him. I remained at the table, my untouched latte growing cold, my mind racing through impossible calculations. The rational choice. He'd said it with such certainty, as if there could be no doubt about what rationality demanded. Drop the story, protect the people I loved, survive to fight another day on safer ground. But rationality had never been my strongest trait. If it had been, I would have chosen a safer career, would have avoided confronting powerful men in public courthouses, would have backed down the moment Rossini's cold eyes had fixed on mine. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Check your email. I opened my email app with trembling fingers. The new message had no subject line, no sender name, just an attachment. I downloaded it, my heart sinking as I recognized what it was. Financial records. Not mine, but Rossini's. Real ones. Not the cleaned-up versions his lawyers would present. Money transfers, shell company formations, names of officials on his payroll. Everything I'd been trying to uncover for 3 months, delivered directly to my inbox. A second text arrived. A gift. Use it wisely, or don't use it at all. Your choice. But choose knowing what's at stake. AR. I sat in that coffee shop for another hour, staring at the files on my phone, understanding finally what Isabella had meant when she said Anthony Rossini always wins. Because even when he gave you options, even when he pretended to offer freedom, the choice itself was an illusion. Use the information and prove him right about the consequences. Don't use it and prove him right about intimidation working. Either way, he won. The next 72 hours passed in a haze of sleepless nights and impossible decisions. I'd copied the financial records Rossini had sent to 3 separate encrypted drives, studied every transaction until the numbers blurred together, and mapped out connections that would make any prosecutor salivate. It was everything I needed to expose not just Rossini's operation, but the entire corrupt ecosystem that enabled it. It was also a death sentence if I used it. I'd stopped going to the office, telling Mason I was considering his offer of leave. My apartment felt like a cage, every shadow a potential threat, every unexpected sound making me jump. I'd installed a chain lock on my door and started sleeping with a kitchen knife under my pillow, as if such pathetic measures could protect me from someone with Rossini's resources. My mother called twice, cheerful and oblivious, talking about her garden and the church social she was planning. I couldn't bring myself to tell her about the surveillance, about the danger I'd put her in simply by being her daughter. What would I even say? That she needed to leave her home, abandon the life she'd rebuilt after my father's death. because I'd decided to go to war with a man who controlled half of Brooklyn. On the second night, I dreamed about my father. He'd been a union organizer, one of the good ones who actually fought for workers rather than selling them out to management. I was 8 when he died, in what the police called a mugging gone wrong, though everyone whispered about the timing, how it happened just days after he'd threatened to expose safety violations at a construction site owned by connected people. In my dream, he stood in our old kitchen, his face weathered and kind, his hands scarred from years of manual labor. Sometimes courage means knowing when to fight and when to live to fight another day, he said, his voice as clear as if he'd never left. There's no honor in dying for a principle if your death accomplishes nothing. I woke with tears on my face and his words echoing in my mind. On the morning of the third day, my phone rang. Unknown number, but I knew who it would be before I answered. Violet. Rossini's voice filled my ear, smooth and inexorable. Time's up. Have you made your decision? I want to meet, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Face to face. No security detail, no public venues, just you and me. Bold, he observed, but foolish. What makes you think I'd agree to such terms? Because you're curious, I replied. You've been curious about me since the courthouse. You could have simply eliminated the threat I represent, but instead you're negotiating. That means you want something beyond my silence. The pause that followed stretched long enough that I wondered if I'd miscalculated, if my psychology was completely wrong. Then he laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise even him. You're perceptive. All right, Violet. Tonight, 8 o'clock. I'll send you the address. Come alone, and I promise the same. The address arrived an hour later, a warehouse in Red Hook, the kind of location that should have sent every self-preservation instinct into overdrive. I told Sarah where I was going in a sealed envelope, with instructions to open it only if I didn't return by midnight. It was a pathetic safety measure, but it was something. I spent the afternoon preparing, not physically, but mentally. I'd made my decision somewhere in those sleepless 72 hours, though I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment. The financial records would stay hidden, my story would remain unpublished, and I would accept Rossini's terms. But I needed him to understand why, needed to make sure he knew this wasn't surrender born of fear alone. The warehouse district was desolate at dusk, industrial buildings casting long shadows across cracked pavement. Rossini's specified location was a converted loft space in a building that had been partially renovated, probably another one of his real estate investments. The ground floor entrance was unlocked, and a single elevator stood open, waiting. I stepped inside, my heart hammering as the doors closed. The elevator rose slowly, old machinery groaning, until it opened directly into a massive loft space. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the harbor, the Manhattan skyline glittering in the gathering darkness beyond. The space was furnished with careful restraint. Leather sofas, modern art on exposed brick walls, a bar area with bottles that probably cost more than my monthly rent. It looked like a showroom for expensive taste, beautiful and utterly impersonal. Rossini stood by the windows, his back to me, hands in his pockets as he gazed out at the view. He wore dark slacks and a charcoal sweater instead of his usual suit, the casual attire somehow making him seem more dangerous, rather than less. Without the armor of formal clothing, I could see the powerful build beneath, the coiled strength in his shoulders and back. Beautiful, isn't it? He said without turning. This view. I bought this building 5 years ago when the neighborhood was still industrial wasteland. Now it's worth triple what I paid. Location, timing, vision, that's all real estate really is. Is that why we're here? I asked, moving into the space but maintaining distance. For a real estate lesson? He turned finally, and even from across the room, the intensity of his focus was palpable. We're here because I wanted you to see something that matters to me. Not my office where I conduct business. Not a public place where we both perform for invisible audiences. Here. Something real. Why? Because you're about to make a choice that will define the rest of your life, he said simply. And I want you to understand what you're choosing. He moved to the bar, pouring amber liquid into 2 crystal glasses. 30-year-old Scotch, he explained, carrying one over to me. My father saved for 2 years to buy a bottle for my 18th birthday. We shared it the night I told him I was going to law school, that I was going to be legitimate, make something of the name he'd given me. I accepted the glass, but didn't drink. You went to law school? Columbia, top of my class. There was no pride in the statement, just fact. I was going to be a prosecutor, fight corruption from the inside. That was the plan. His smile was bitter. Then my father had a heart attack during my 2nd year. The restaurant was failing. We had no insurance. And suddenly I was drowning in medical bills and debt. So you turned to crime, I concluded. I turned to solutions, he corrected. A family friend offered me work, private security for people in the neighborhood who couldn't rely on police protection. One thing led to another, and suddenly I was making more in a month than my father had made in a year. I told myself it was temporary, just until the debts were paid. But it never is, I said softly. Temporary. No, he agreed. It never is. I discovered I was good at it. The organization, the strategy, the ruthlessness required to survive in that world. And somewhere along the way, the boy who wanted to be a prosecutor died, and I became this instead. He gestured around the loft at the expensive furnishings and $1,000,000 view. This is what I built from that choice: power, wealth, influence. The ability to protect people who can't protect themselves, even if my methods aren't sanctioned by law. And the people you've hurt? I challenged. The ones who've disappeared? What about them? His expression hardened. In my world, people make choices. Sometimes those choices put them at odds with my organization, with my people. When that happens, I do what's necessary to protect what's mine. I don't apologize for that. You should, I said, my voice sharper than intended. You should apologize to their families, to everyone whose lives you've destroyed for your empire. Is that what you do, Violet? He moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the confined space. If you were in my position, if you had the power to shape outcomes, to decide who wins and who loses, would you really be so different? Yes, I said immediately. I would never. You're already doing it, he interrupted. Right now. You have information that could damage me, possibly destroy years of work. You have the power to make that choice. And you're choosing not to use it, not because you've suddenly decided I'm innocent, but because you're calculating costs and benefits. You're choosing to protect people you love over abstract principles. How is that different from what I do? The comparison was false, manipulative, but it still hit something uncomfortably close to truth. I was making calculations, weighing lives against ideals. The fact that my choice was defensive rather than offensive didn't change the fundamental math. I came here to tell you I accept your terms, I said quietly. I'll drop the story. I won't investigate you further. Whatever you want from me, you have it. I expected triumph, satisfaction, the victorious smile of someone who'd won. Instead, Rossini's expression became almost sad. That's not enough, he said. I stared at him. What? Your silence isn't enough, Violet. Because silence is passive. It's negative space. I need something more from you. You want me to work for you? I guessed, horror dawning. That's what this is about. You want to turn me, make me another one of your assets. I want you to understand me, he corrected. Not as the monster in your articles, but as a person operating in an imperfect world. I want you to see what I see, understand the choices I make and why I make them. Why? I demanded. Why does my understanding matter to you? He was close now, close enough that I could smell his cologne, see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes. Because for the first time in a very long time, someone has looked at me and seen me as human, rather than as a force of nature or a symbol of corruption. You confronted me as a person, held me accountable as an individual. Do you have any idea how rare that is? So this is about ego? I asked. About being recognized? It's about being known, he said, his voice dropping to something almost vulnerable. Truly known, not feared or respected or hated, but actually understood. You spent 3 months investigating me, Violet. 3 months trying to understand how I operate, what makes me tick. You got closer than anyone else ever has. And you want me to finish the job, I concluded. Not as an investigative journalist, but as... what? Your biographer? Your confessor? As someone who might see beyond the empire to the man who built it, he said. Someone intelligent enough to understand the complexity, honest enough to acknowledge uncomfortable truths. His hand came up, fingers brushing my cheek with startling gentleness. Someone who interests me in ways that have nothing to do with business or threats or power games. I should have pulled away. Should have maintained professional distance, remembered who he was and what he'd done. But something in his touch, in the raw honesty of his admission, kept me frozen in place. I'm not going to fall in love with you, I said, the words emerging more defensively than I'd intended. If that's what you're expecting, some twisted Stockholm syndrome where I forget everything you've done. I'm not asking for love, he interrupted. I'm asking for time. A chance to show you the full picture, not just the criminal empire you've been documenting. 6 months. That's all. 6 months of what, exactly? Of access, he said. You shadow me. See how I operate, meet the people who depend on me, understand the decisions I make and why. Document everything if you want. Keep your journalistic integrity. At the end of 6 months, you make a choice. Publish what you've learned or don't. Either way, you'll understand me completely. It was insane. Reckless. Probably exactly what he wanted me to think before he maneuvered me into some position where I had no leverage left at all. But it was also the story of a lifetime, unprecedented access to someone who operated in absolute shadow, a chance to document from the inside, something no journalist had ever seen. And my mother? I asked. My friends? What happens to them? Under my protection, he said immediately. Genuine protection, Violet. Not threats disguised as offers. I'll assign security to your mother's house, discreet enough she won't notice. Your friends remain off limits to my organization. You have my word. Your word, I repeated skeptically. The word of a man who breaks into homes and threatens innocent people. The word of a man who has never broken a promise in 20 years, he countered. Ask anyone in my organization. My word is absolute. It has to be in my world, because reputation and trust are the only real currencies we trade in. I walked away from him, needing space to think clearly. My reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows showed a woman who looked exhausted, frightened, but also something else. Intrigued, perhaps, or conflicted in ways that went beyond simple fear. 6 months embedded in a criminal organization. 6 months documenting Anthony Rossini's world from the inside. It was either the most dangerous mistake I could make, or the most important story of my career. What if I learn things that I can't ethically keep silent about? I asked. What if I witness crimes in progress? Then you document them, he said. I won't censor your observations or limit your access. But I will ask that you hold publication until the 6 months are complete. Give yourself time to see the full context before making judgments. That could make me complicit, I protested. an accessory after the fact. It could, he agreed. Or it could make you the most informed journalist in the city, someone who actually understands the systems she reports on, rather than making assumptions from outside. He paused. But yes, there are risks. Legal, ethical, personal. I'm not pretending otherwise. I turned back to face him, studying this man who'd turned my life upside down in less than a week. He looked relaxed, confident, but I'd learned to read the subtle signs of tension in his shoulders, the calculation constantly running behind those gray eyes. If I agree, I said slowly, there have to be ground rules. I maintain editorial independence. I'm not your PR agent or your mouthpiece. Whatever I ultimately write, you don't get approval or veto power. Agreed. I want the truth. Real numbers, real operations, real names, not sanitized versions designed to make you look better. Agreed, within reason. There are some operational details that could endanger my people if exposed. Those we'll negotiate on a case-by-case basis. And you don't touch my mother or anyone else I care about. Ever. For any reason. His expression became deadly serious. You have my absolute word. Your mother, your friends, anyone you designate as off-limits remains untouchable by me and my organization. Violation of that promise would void our entire agreement. I should have demanded more, should have gotten it in writing, involved lawyers, protected myself more thoroughly. But something in his eyes when he gave that last promise made me believe him, made me think that perhaps his word really was worth something in whatever moral universe he inhabited. 6 months, I said finally. Starting tomorrow. And Rossini? If you're lying to me, if this is some elaborate trap, I will find a way to destroy you. I don't care what it costs me. His smile was slow and genuine. That's exactly why you interest me, Violet Hayes. You're willing to go to war even when you know you'll lose. That's not rationality. That's something more dangerous. What? Integrity, he said simply. Real, uncompromising integrity. It's the rarest quality in the world I inhabit. He extended his hand. Do we have a deal? I looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment, understanding that shaking it would change everything, would transform me from outside observer to embedded participant, would cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. My career, my principles, possibly my life. All of it balanced on this single choice. I thought of my father's dream, of him telling me to live to fight another day. I thought of Isabella's warning, of the scars on her arms and the terror in her eyes. I thought of my mother in her garden, unaware of the danger that had circled her home, and then I thought of the 3 months I'd spent chasing shadows, trying to understand a man who operated beyond the reach of conventional accountability. Here was a chance to actually know, to document from the inside, to create something no one else could. I took his hand. His grip was firm, warm, somehow more intimate than a simple handshake should be. He held on for a beat longer than necessary, his thumb brushing across my knuckles in a gesture that sent an unexpected shiver through me. Tomorrow morning, he said. 9 o'clock. I'll send a car to your apartment. Dress professionally but comfortably. We have a long day ahead. Where are we going? To meet the people you think I terrorize, he said. The families and business owners who depend on me. You want the full picture? That's where we start. After he left, I remained in the loft for another hour, staring out at the Manhattan skyline and trying to process what I'd just agreed to. 6 months embedded in Anthony Rossini's world, 6 months documenting a criminal empire from the inside, 6 months during which anything could happen. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Still alive? Getting worried. Alive, I typed back. But I think I just made either the best or worst decision of my life. Those are usually the same thing, she replied. Call me tomorrow? If I can, I answered, and meant it. The black Mercedes arrived at precisely 9 o'clock, idling at the curb outside my building with the kind of presence that made my neighbors peer through their curtains. The driver was Domenico, one of Rossini's regular security detail, a man whose professional courtesy couldn't quite mask the dangerous competence beneath. He opened the rear door without a word, his expression neutral as I slid into the leather interior. Rossini was already inside, dressed in a navy suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. He was reading something on his tablet, his attention seemingly absorbed. But I knew better than to think he hadn't registered every detail of my appearance the moment I'd entered the car. Good morning, Violet, he said without looking up. Coffee is in the holder to your right. I had Domenico pick up your usual order. I glanced at the cup, saw the familiar logo from my neighborhood cafe. You have my coffee order memorized and my regular location documented. Should I be flattered or disturbed? Both, probably. He set down the tablet, giving me his full attention. But it's more efficient than asking what you want every morning. We'll be spending considerable time together over the next 6 months. Small courtesies make that easier. The car pulled into traffic, heading toward Brooklyn. I sipped the coffee. Perfect temperature, extra shot, no sugar, and tried to ignore how unsettling it was that he'd gotten every detail right. So where are we going? I asked. You mentioned meeting people who depend on you. The Moretti family, he replied. They own a restaurant in Bensonhurst, been there for 3 generations. 2 months ago, a development company tried to force them out through a combination of tax assessments and building code violations. Violations that mysteriously appeared after they refused to sell, and you intervened. I facilitated a solution, he corrected. The development company discovered that acquiring that particular property would create unforeseen complications with their other projects. The tax assessments were reevaluated. The Morettis kept their restaurant. What did they pay you? I asked, pulling out my phone to take notes. What was your price for this intervention? His smile was slight. Dinner once a month. Mrs. Moretti makes the best osso buco in Brooklyn, and she insists on feeding me properly. That's the extent of my compensation. I studied him, looking for the angle, the hidden agenda. Men like Rossini didn't do favors out of altruism. There was always a price, always leverage being accumulated for future use. You're skeptical, he observed. Good. Skepticism will serve you well over the next 6 months. But Violet, not everything I do has a sinister motive. Sometimes protection is simply protection. The restaurant was a small, family-run establishment tucked between a barber shop and a bakery, the kind of place that had probably looked exactly the same for 50 years. Hand-painted sign, red checkered curtains in the windows, the scent of garlic and tomato sauce drifting out every time the door opened. Mrs. Moretti emerged before we'd even fully exited the car, a woman in her 70s with silver hair and flour dusted across her apron. Her face lit up when she saw Rossini, and she pulled him into an embrace that he accepted with surprising warmth. Anthony, finally you come to see us, she scolded in heavily accented English. I make your favorite, the osso buco, and you bring a friend? Her gaze found me, sharp and assessing despite her grandmotherly appearance. Mrs. Moretti, this is Violet Hayes. She's a journalist writing about my business interests. The older woman's expression shifted, something cautious entering her eyes. A journalist. You be careful what you write about this one, yes? He is a good man, even if others say different. She ushered us inside, where her husband and 2 adult sons were preparing for the lunch rush. The interior was exactly what I'd expected. Family photographs covering every available wall space, mismatched tables with those same red checkered tablecloths, a Virgin Mary statue in the corner surrounded by votive candles. Over the next hour, I listened as the Morettis told their story. The development company's pressure tactics, the mounting bills they couldn't pay, the very real fear that they would lose everything their grandfather had built. And then Rossini's intervention, swift and decisive, that had made all their problems disappear. "But what did you do specifically?" I pressed, directing the question to Rossini. "How did you make a development company back off?" "I made them understand that acquiring this property would cost more than it was worth," he replied. "Sometimes that means applying financial pressure. Sometimes it means revealing information they'd prefer to keep private. In this case, I discovered that the development company was using falsified inspection reports, paying off city officials to target specific properties. I brought that information to the attention of people who cared about such irregularities. So you blackmailed them." "I provided evidence of criminal activity to appropriate authorities," he corrected. "The fact that this evidence encouraged them to pursue their interests elsewhere is simply a consequence of transparency." It was a semantic dodge, but I had to admit there was a certain logic to it. If the development company had been acting illegally, exposing that illegality wasn't the same as the protection rackets I'd been investigating. Unless, of course, Rossini had orchestrated the entire situation to create dependency. "How often does this happen?" I asked. "Families coming to you with problems?" "Often enough that I employ 2 people full-time just to handle these requests," he said. "Community relations, I call it. People know that when the system fails them, when corrupt officials or predatory businesses target them, I can provide solutions. For a price. Sometimes," he acknowledged, "when they can afford it. Often there's no charge beyond gratitude and goodwill. You'd be surprised how valuable goodwill is in my line of work." We left the restaurant with Mrs. Moretti pressing containers of food into our hands and extracting a promise from Rossini to return soon. As we drove away, I found myself more confused than enlightened. The Morettis genuinely seemed to view him as a benefactor, a protector who'd saved their livelihood. It didn't align with the ruthless criminal I'd been investigating. "You're thinking it's all performance," Rossini said, reading my expression. "That I cultivate these relationships for strategic purposes. Isn't it?" "Partly," he admitted. "But strategy doesn't preclude genuine connection, Violet. I grew up in neighborhoods like this, new families like the Morettis. My father could have been Mr. Moretti, working 18-hour days to keep a dream alive while the system slowly crushed him. When I help them, yes, it builds loyalty and strengthens my position. But it also feels like honoring my father's memory. The vulnerability in that admission caught me off guard. I'd expected cold calculation, not genuine emotion connected to childhood trauma. Our next stop was a community center in Red Hook, a converted warehouse that offered after-school programs and job training. The director, a woman named Carmen Rodriguez, greeted Rossini with the same warmth Mrs. Moretti had shown, though with more professional polish. "Mr. Rossini funds about 60% of our operating budget," she explained as she gave us a tour. "Without his support, we'd have closed years ago. The city keeps cutting funding for programs like ours, and private donors are scarce in neighborhoods like this." "What does he get in return?" I asked bluntly. Carmen looked at me with something between pity and understanding. "He gets kids off the streets. He gets young people trained for legitimate work instead of falling into gangs or drug trade. Is that such a terrible exchange?" It wasn't, which was precisely what made it so confusing. Every stop on our tour that day revealed the same pattern. Rossini providing resources, solving problems, creating goodwill. But each act of apparent generosity also strengthened his network, made more people dependent on him, expanded his influence through means that skirted the line between charity and control. By late afternoon, we'd visited 2 more businesses, a medical clinic, and met with a half-dozen community leaders. Each encounter showed a different facet of his operation, and each one complicated my understanding of who Anthony Rossini actually was. "You're building an empire of obligation," I said as we drove back toward Manhattan. "Everyone we met today owes you something. That's not altruism. It's strategic investment in loyalty." Can't it be both? He countered. Yes, I benefit from these relationships, but they benefit too. The Morettis kept their restaurant. The community center stays open. The medical clinic provides care to people who can't afford insurance. Everyone wins. Except the people who oppose you, I said. The ones who don't fit into your benevolent empire. What happens to them? His expression hardened. We'll get to that part of the tour eventually, but not today. Today was about showing you that I'm not simply a predator, that there's more complexity to what I do than your articles suggested. I never said there wasn't complexity, I protested, but complexity doesn't equal morality. You can do good things and still be fundamentally corrupt. Agreed, he said, surprising me, which is why I'm giving you 6 months instead of 6 hours. You need time to understand the full picture, to see how all these pieces fit together. The car pulled up outside a restaurant in Tribeca, one of those aggressively trendy places with exposed Edison bulbs and a waiting list measured in months. Rossini's hand found the small of my back as we exited, a gesture of casual possession that sent an unwelcome flutter through me. We have a reservation? He told the hostess, who immediately ushered us to a private room in the back. This wasn't part of the tour, I observed as we were seated at a table set for 2, candles already lit, wine waiting. Consider it a working dinner, he said. We need to establish protocols for the next 6 months. Boundaries, expectations, logistics. A waiter appeared with menus, but Rossini waved them away. We'll have the chef's tasting menu. And Violet, you should try the wine. It's a 09 Barolo, exceptional vintage. I shouldn't drink while working, I said automatically. You're not working right now. You're having dinner with someone who's about to become a significant part of your life. 1 glass won't compromise your journalistic integrity. I accepted the wine, if only because arguing seemed more intimate than agreeing. The first sip was spectacular, rich and complex with layers that kept revealing themselves. Of course it was. Everything in Rossini's world was expensive and perfect, and designed to make you forget the darkness underneath. Ground rules, I said, pulling out my phone to record. First, I need complete access. No sanitized versions, no areas that are off limits because they're too sensitive. Within reason, he countered. There are certain operations that could endanger lives if exposed. Those we'll discuss case by case. Second, I maintain editorial independence. Whatever I ultimately publish, you don't get to review or approve it. Agreed, with one caveat. You give me 24 hours notice before publication. Not for approval, but so I can prepare for any fallout. I considered this. It seemed reasonable, and 24 hours wouldn't give him time to stop publication even if he tried. Acceptable. Third, my mother and friends remain completely off limits. No surveillance, no contact, no exceptions. Already agreed, he said. That was part of our original deal. And fourth, I continued, we maintain professional boundaries. This isn't a relationship, Rossini. This is journalism. I'm documenting you, not dating you. Something flickered in his eyes, amusement or perhaps challenge. Anthony, he said, if we're going to spend 6 months together, you should use my first name. And Violet, I'm not confused about what this is, but I won't pretend there isn't attraction between us. There isn't, I said quickly. Too quickly. Liar, he replied, his voice dropping to something intimate. You've been attracted to me since the courthouse, even as you've been horrified by me. That's part of why you agreed to this arrangement. You want to understand me, yes, but you also want to be close to me, to see if the man matches the reputation. Heat flooded my face. I'm not. It's all right, he interrupted gently. I'm attracted to you too, have been since you looked me in the eye and called me a criminal in front of half the city's press. It would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. Acting on that attraction would be completely unethical, I said firmly. I'm supposed to be documenting you objectively, not sleeping with you. I know, he agreed. Which is why I'm not going to seduce you, Violet. If anything happens between us, it will be because you choose it. Because you decide that understanding me completely requires that level of intimacy. That won't happen. His smile was knowing. We'll see. 6 months is a long time, and proximity has a way of breaking down barriers we think are absolute. The food arrived. Course after course of culinary perfection that I barely tasted. My mind was too busy processing everything I'd seen today. Everything I'd learned about the man sitting across from me. He wasn't the simple villain I'd constructed in my articles, but he wasn't innocent either. He existed in some gray space that defied easy categorization, and that made him far more dangerous than a straightforward criminal would be. Tell me about Isabella, I said abruptly, remembering the woman who'd broken into my apartment with her warnings and scars. Rossini's expression shuddered immediately. What about her? She came to see me, warned me about what happens to people who threaten you. Who is she? He was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the table. Isabella Marino. She was engaged to my cousin Marco 5 years ago. She also happened to be an undercover federal agent, part of a task force investigating my organization. My breath caught. What happened to her? Marco discovered the truth, Rossini said, his voice carefully controlled. He felt betrayed, used. He wanted to handle it personally, make an example of her. I intervened. How? I paid her to disappear, he said bluntly. Gave her a new identity, enough money to start over somewhere far from here. In exchange, she provided no testimony against my organization and never contacted anyone from her old life again. But she came back, I said, to warn me. Which means she violated our agreement, he replied, something dangerous entering his tone, and that puts her at risk again. If Marco discovers she's been in contact with you. You'd let him kill her? I'd try to prevent it, he said. But I have limited ability to protect people who break deals with me, Violet. That's the reality of my world. Agreements are absolute because without them, everything falls apart into chaos and violence. I thought of Isabella's haunted eyes, the scars on her arms. What did Marco do to her before you intervened? Enough that she'll carry the trauma for the rest of her life, Rossini said quietly. Which is why I made the deal I did, got her out before he could finish what he started. But it also taught me something important about limits, about lines that shouldn't be crossed even in my business. What lines? He met my gaze directly. Women and children are off limits. Not as collateral, not as leverage, not as examples. That's been my policy since Isabella. It's cost me some opportunities, made me seem weak to certain rivals. But it's non-negotiable. Is that supposed to make me feel safe? I asked. Knowing that you'll draw the line at torturing women, even if you'll do it to men? It should make you understand that I have principles, he replied. Fucked up principles by conventional standards, perhaps, but principles nonetheless. I'm not asking you to approve of them, Violet, just to acknowledge they exist. The rest of dinner passed in tense silence, both of us processing the day's revelations. By the time Domenico drove me home, it was past midnight, and I felt utterly drained. 6 months of this, I thought. 6 months of having my assumptions challenged, my principles tested, my objectivity compromised by proximity to someone who defied simple categorization. Tomorrow we tour the port operations, Rossini said as I prepared to exit the car. The part of my business you've been most interested in documenting. Wear practical shoes and clothes you don't mind getting dirty. Why? His smile was enigmatic. Because you wanted the truth, Violet. All of it. And the truth about how my empire actually functions isn't found in restaurants and community centers. It's found in warehouses and shipping containers, in the unglamorous machinery of commerce and control. After he drove away, I climbed the stairs to my apartment, my mind already racing with tomorrow's possibilities. The port operations were where the real criminal activity happened, where drugs and contraband flowed through under the cover of legitimate shipping. If I could document that, if I could expose the mechanics of how Rossini's organization actually functioned. But that was the trap, wasn't it? The more access he gave me, the more complicit I became. The more I understood his world, the harder it would be to condemn it completely. He was giving me enough rope to hang either him or myself, and I wasn't sure which outcome he was hoping for. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You did well today. Same time tomorrow. Sleep well, Violet. A." I stared at the message, then at my reflection in the darkened window. I looked tired, conflicted, more uncertain than I'd been in years. The journalist who'd confronted Anthony Rossini in the courthouse hallway had been so certain of her righteousness, so confident in the clear line between good and evil. That woman was disappearing, replaced by someone who'd spent a day watching a criminal distribute charity, who'd shared expensive wine with someone she should despise, who'd felt her heart race when his hand touched the small of her back. 6 months, I reminded myself. Just 6 months to document the truth, and then decide what to do with it. I could maintain my objectivity for 6 months. I could resist whatever pull I felt toward him. I could emerge from this with both my integrity and my story intact. I fell asleep trying to believe it. The port district at dawn was a different world, all harsh industrial sounds and the acrid smell of salt water mixed with diesel fuel. Container ships loomed like metal mountains against the gray sky, cranes moving with mechanical precision to transfer cargo between vessel and dock. Workers in hard hats and reflective vests moved with practiced efficiency, their shouts and hand signals creating a choreography of commerce. Rossini met me at the gate, dressed down in dark jeans and a leather jacket, looking more dangerous in casual clothes than he ever had in his expensive suits. He handed me a hard hat and safety vest without comment, then led me into the maze of shipping containers that stretched for what seemed like miles. "This is the heart of it," he said, his voice pitched low beneath the industrial noise. 400 acres of port facility, processing roughly 2 million containers annually. Everything from electronics to clothing to automotive parts passes through here. "And contraband," I added, my phone already recording. "Drugs, weapons, whatever else you smuggle through legitimate shipments." "Sometimes," he acknowledged, surprising me with his directness, "though far less than you'd imagine. The real money isn't in smuggling, Violet. It's in controlling the flow of legitimate commerce." He gestured to a massive warehouse ahead of us. "Every container that moves through this port pays a fee. Every truck that hauls cargo, every worker who processes shipments, every business that depends on timely delivery. All of it flows through systems I control." "Protection money," I said. "Extortion dressed up as service fees." "Insurance," he corrected. "Against theft, against delays, against the 1,000 complications that can destroy a shipping business. Companies pay me to ensure their goods move smoothly through the port, and I guarantee that smoothness through influence and organization." We entered the warehouse, where workers were systematically processing containers. The space was enormous, easily the size of several football fields, with forklifts moving between towering stacks of cargo. Rossini nodded to several workers as we passed, received respectful nods in return, their eyes tracking us with a combination of wariness and deference. "These people work for you?" I asked. "Some directly, others through contractors. But they all know who really runs this operation." He stopped beside a container being inspected, gestured to the customs agent overseeing the process. "Tommy, how's the family?" The agent, a heavy-set man in his 50s, smiled warmly. "Good, Mr. Rossini. My daughter got into NYU. Thanks for asking." Congratulations. You must be proud." Rossini's hand found my elbow, guiding me past the inspection. Once we were out of earshot, he continued. "Tommy's been on my payroll for 12 years. Not every container gets thoroughly inspected, and when certain shipments come through, he ensures they move efficiently. So, you're admitting to bribing customs officials, I said, making sure my phone caught every word. I'm admitting that the system is imperfect, and I work within its realities, he replied. Tommy has a daughter in college, a wife with medical issues, and a salary that barely covers his rent. I supplement that salary in exchange for reasonable flexibility. Everyone wins. Except the legitimate businesses competing on an unlevel playing field, I countered. Except the taxpayers who expect customs officials to actually do their jobs. Idealism, he said, though not unkindly. The world you want to exist, where everyone follows the rules and the system works fairly, doesn't exist, Violet. It never has. I simply acknowledge reality and optimize outcomes within it. We spent the next 3 hours touring the port operations, and with each revelation, I felt my understanding shift and complicate. Yes, Rossini was clearly running illegal operations, bribing officials, and circumventing regulations, but the workers genuinely seemed better off under his organization than they had been before. The businesses that paid his fees received reliable service in a notoriously unreliable industry. Even the legitimate cargo moved more efficiently through his influence. It was systemic corruption, but corruption that functioned better than the legitimate system it had replaced. You're thinking about moral relativism, Rossini observed as we stood on a viewing platform overlooking the entire port, wondering if better outcomes justify unethical means. I'm thinking that you've created a system that makes people dependent on you, I replied. That makes it nearly impossible to oppose you without hurting innocent people who rely on your infrastructure. Yes, he agreed simply. That's exactly what I've done. It's also why my organization has survived for 20 years while others have fallen. Sustainable power isn't built on fear alone, Violet. It's built on being genuinely necessary. A commotion below drew our attention. 2 men were arguing near a container, their voices rising above the background noise. Within seconds, 3 of Rossini's security team materialized, moving with practiced efficiency to separate the combatants. What's happening? I asked. Rossini's expression had hardened, the genial tour guide disappearing behind something colder. Territory dispute. Someone's trying to move product through my port, without authorization. He descended the platform stairs with swift purpose, and I followed, my journalist instincts overriding any concern for safety. By the time we reached the scene, 1 man was being held by security, while the other stood defiant, his face flushed with anger. This is bullshit, Rossini, the defiant man spat. I paid for this shipment. I have contracts. Legitimate business. You have contracts you negotiated without clearing them through proper channels, Rossini interrupted, his voice quiet, but carrying absolute authority. This is my port, Santoro. Everything that moves through it goes through me. Those are the rules. Your rules? Santoro shot back. You don't own the port. You don't own the city. You're just another gangster who thinks he's untouchable. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Rossini's security team tensed, hands moving subtly toward concealed weapons. I felt my heart hammering, suddenly very aware of how quickly this situation could turn violent. You're right, Rossini said, surprising everyone. I don't own the port. I don't own the city. But I do own the infrastructure that makes this port functional, and that gives me authority over what moves through it. He stepped closer to Santoro, his presence overwhelming. You want to do legitimate business? Follow legitimate channels. Come to me with your contracts, pay the appropriate fees, and your shipments move without problems. Try to circumvent the system, and you create problems for everyone. And if I refuse? Santoro challenged, though his voice had lost some of its earlier bravado. Rossini's smile was cold. Then your containers get very thoroughly inspected. Every single one. By customs officials who suddenly have all the time in the world. Your shipments get delayed. Your clients get angry. Your reputation suffers. How long do you think your business survives that kind of scrutiny? It wasn't a threat of violence, but it was absolutely a threat. And watching Santoro's face pale with understanding, I saw exactly how Rossini's system maintained itself. Not through fear of murder, but through economic pressure that could destroy someone without ever directly harming them. "We're done here," Rossini said dismissively. "Marco, escort Mr. Santoro off the premises. Make sure he understands the proper procedures for future business." As Santoro was led away, still muttering protests, Rossini turned to me. "Document that," he said. "Put it in your story. That's how my organization actually functions, Violet. Economic pressure, strategic control, overwhelming force applied to infrastructure rather than people." "It's still coercion," I protested. "You're still forcing people to comply through threats. I'm maintaining order in a system that would collapse into chaos without organization," he countered. "You want to see what happens when there's no central authority? Talk to the businesses that operated here before I consolidated power. Talk to the workers who couldn't get consistent employment. Talk to anyone who remembers the violence and instability that characterized this port 20 years ago." We argued about it over lunch in his office overlooking the port, a converted shipping container that had been transformed into surprisingly comfortable workspace. He showed me profit and loss statements, employment records, testimony from business owners. Every piece of evidence seemed designed to complicate my understanding, to blur the line between criminal enterprise and effective governance. By mid-afternoon, I was exhausted and confused, my certainty about who Rossini was and what he represented badly shaken. He seemed to sense this, his manner gentling as he drove me back to Manhattan. "You're struggling with cognitive dissonance," he observed. "The man you're seeing doesn't match the monster you investigated." "You're still a criminal," I said firmly. "Everything I saw today confirms that." "Yes," he agreed. "I'm also effective, organized, and genuinely necessary for the functioning of that port. Both things are true, simultaneously." We drove in silence for a while, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the city. When we finally pulled up outside my building, Rossini made no move to let me exit immediately. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice unusually hesitant. "About tomorrow." "What about tomorrow?" "We're attending a meeting with my cousin Marco," he said. "The same Marco who was engaged to Isabella." My stomach dropped. "Why?" "Because he's been asking questions about you. About why I'm suddenly spending time with a journalist who publicly accused me of crimes. He's suspicious, and when Marco gets suspicious, people get hurt. So you're using me as bait," I concluded. "Bringing me into his presence to prove what, exactly? That I'm harmless? That I'm already compromised?" "I'm bringing you because refusing would make him more suspicious," Rossini replied. "And because you wanted complete access to my world. Marco is part of that world, one of my most important lieutenants. Understanding my organization means understanding him." "The man who tortured Isabella," I said slowly. "The man you had to pay her to escape from. You're bringing me to meet him." "I'll be there the entire time," he said firmly. "He won't touch you, won't threaten you. But you need to be careful, Violet. Marco is dangerous in ways I'm not, and he has no tolerance for perceived disrespect or weakness." After he left, I climbed to my apartment with a sense of dread settling over me. I'd agreed to document Rossini's world, but I hadn't fully considered what that would mean. Meeting the people who actually carried out the violence his organization required. Seeing the machinery of his empire from the inside, including its darkest components. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Isabella's scars, about the terror in her voice when she'd warned me about Rossini, about Santoro's face when he'd realized his business could be destroyed with a word, about all the ways power could be wielded that left no visible bruises but destroyed people just as thoroughly. Around 2 a.m, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. If you're reading this, it means you haven't blocked me yet. Good. You need to know something about tomorrow. Marco doesn't just suspect you're a threat. He's been investigating you independently. He knows about your mother, about Sarah, about everyone you care about, and he's not as patient as Anthony. Be very, very careful. Isabella. My blood ran cold. How had Isabella known about tomorrow's meeting? Was she still watching me? Or worse, was she in contact with someone inside Rossini's organization who was feeding her information? I forwarded the message to Rossini with a simple question. Did you know about this? His response came within minutes, despite the late hour. No. Can you send me Isabella's number? And Violet, if you want to cancel tomorrow, I'll understand. I can meet with Marco alone. I stared at that message for a long time. The smart thing would be to cancel, to avoid putting myself in proximity to someone even Rossini acknowledged was dangerous. But if I backed down now, I'd never get the full story. I'd never understand the complete truth about how his organization functioned. I'll be there, I typed back. But Rossini, if anything happens to me, if Marco tries anything, I have insurance. Files set to automatically publish if I don't check in every 24 hours. It was a bluff. I had no such system set up, but he didn't need to know that. Understood, came his reply. I promise you, nothing will happen. See you at 9. The next morning arrived too quickly. I dressed carefully, choosing clothes that projected confidence without being provocative. Tailored slacks, a structured blazer, minimal jewelry. I wanted to look professional, competent, not like someone who could be easily intimidated. The car arrived precisely on time, but this time Rossini wasn't inside. Instead, a note waited on the seat. Change of plans. Marco insisted on meeting at his location. Address below. I'll meet you there. I'm sorry, Violet. If you want to turn around, I'll understand. I should have turned around. Should have called the whole thing off and gone home. But the journalist in me needed to see this through, needed to understand who Marco was and what role he played in Rossini's empire. The address was in Staten Island, a neighborhood I didn't recognize. As we drove, I noticed the surroundings becoming increasingly industrial, isolated. Fewer buildings, fewer people, more empty lots and abandoned warehouses. Every instinct screamed at me to tell the driver to turn around. We pulled up outside a nondescript brick building with no signage, no indication of what it might contain. Domenico opened my door, his expression grave. Mr. Rossini is already inside, he said quietly. Top floor. The elevator will take you directly up. Domenico, I said, stopping him before he could retreat to the car. If something goes wrong in there... Nothing will go wrong, he interrupted, but his eyes said otherwise. Mr. Rossini won't allow it. The elevator was industrial, all steel and exposed mechanisms. It rose slowly, creaking ominously, until it opened directly into a large open space that might once have been a factory floor. Now it had been converted into something else entirely. A combination office, and what I could only describe as interrogation room. Rossini stood by the windows, his posture tense despite his seemingly casual stance. And beside him, studying me with undisguised hostility, was a man who could only be Marco. He shared Rossini's height and build, but where Rossini was all controlled elegance, Marco radiated barely contained violence. His face was harder, scarred along one cheek, his eyes cold in a way that made Rossini's calculating gaze seem warm by comparison. So this is the journalist, Marco said, his voice carrying a slight accent that Rossini's had lost. The one who thinks she can expose our family business with her little articles. Marco, Rossini's voice held a warning. Violet is here under my protection. She's documenting my legitimate operations. Legitimate, Marco repeated mockingly. Is that what we're calling it now? His gaze raked over me with obvious contempt. She looks like every other crusading reporter who thinks she's going to bring down the big bad mafia. They all think they're special, Anthony. They all think they'll be different. I am different, I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. I'm not here to bring anyone down. I'm here to document the truth, whatever that truth is. Marco laughed, a sound without humor. The truth. You want the truth? He moved closer, and I fought the urge to step back. The truth is that everything my cousin has shown you this week is theater. Community centers and restaurants. Port operations that look almost legitimate. You think that's what this organization is really about? Marco, that's enough, Rossini said sharply. No, cousin. If she wants the truth, let's show her the truth. Marco pulled out his phone, swiped through some photos, then thrust the device in my face. This is what happens to people who steal from us. This is what happens when someone thinks they can break our rules. The images were horrific. A man beaten beyond recognition. Another whose fingers had been systematically broken. A third with burns that made my stomach turn. I forced myself to look, to document with my eyes what my phone couldn't capture. That's the truth of this business, Marco said. Not fancy dinners and charity work. Pain and fear and absolute control maintained through the threat of violence. Put the phone away, Rossini commanded, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. Those situations were handled by your crew, not mine. Don't pretend my methods and yours are the same. They're different degrees of the same thing, Marco countered. You just have better PR. He turned back to me. And you, little journalist, you're part of that PR, another way for Anthony to look legitimate while the real work happens in places like this. Is that true? I asked Rossini directly. Am I just part of your image management? Before he could answer, Marco moved with startling speed, his hand shooting out to grab my wrist. You want to know what's true? I'll show you what's true. Let her go, Rossini said, his voice deadly quiet. Now. Or what? Marco challenged. You'll protect her the way you protected Isabella? We both know how that ended. The mention of Isabella's name changed something in the atmosphere. Rossini moved, faster than I would have thought possible for someone his size, and suddenly he was between Marco and me, his hand on his cousin's throat. I warned you what would happen if you ever brought up Isabella again, Rossini said, each word precise and controlled despite the violence implied in his grip. And I'm warning you now about Violet. She's under my protection. Absolutely. If you touch her, if you threaten her, if you so much as look at her wrong, you and I are going to have a very different kind of conversation. For a moment, I thought Marco would fight back, escalate the situation into actual violence. But something in Rossini's eyes must have convinced him otherwise. He raised his hands in surrender, and Rossini released him, stepping back, but keeping himself positioned between us. Fine, Marco said, rubbing his throat. She's your pet project, but don't come crying to me when she publishes some exposé that brings the feds down on all of us. And don't expect me to clean up your mess when your sentimentality costs us everything. He stormed toward the elevator, punching the button with unnecessary force. Before the doors closed, he called back. You're getting soft, Anthony. And in our business, soft gets you killed. The silence after he left was oppressive. Rossini remained standing, his back to me, his shoulders rigid with tension. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. I apologize. That shouldn't have happened. Marco was supposed to meet us at a restaurant, somewhere public and safe. He changed the location deliberately to unsettle you. Did it work? I asked, though we both knew the answer. My hands were still shaking, my heart racing from the confrontation. Violet. He turned to face me, and I saw something in his expression I'd never seen before. Not calculation or control, but genuine concern. You can walk away from this arrangement right now. I'll honor our original deal. Drop the story. Leave you and your family alone. This morning proved that giving you access to my world means exposing you to dangers I can't fully control. Can't control or won't control, I challenged. Marco works for you. He's part of your organization. Those photos he showed me, that violence, it happens under your authority whether you personally order it or not. Yes, he admitted. Marco handles aspects of the business that require a heavier hand than I prefer. He's useful precisely because he's willing to do things I'm not. But that also makes him dangerous and unpredictable. So, you use him as your enforcer, while maintaining plausible deniability about the worst violence, I concluded. That's not moral superiority, Rossini. That's just strategic delegation of your guilt. His jaw tightened. I never claimed moral superiority. I claimed I have rules, lines I don't cross. Marco operates closer to those lines than I'd like. But I need him. Because there are situations where someone has to be willing to use violence, and I'd rather it be controlled violence under my authority than chaos. That's a rationalization, I said. You're responsible for everything your organization does, including Marco's brutality. Yes, he agreed simply. I am. Just as the CEO of a corporation is responsible for every worker in their supply chain, even the ones they never meet. That's what leadership means, Violet. Ultimate responsibility for outcomes, even the ugly ones you'd prefer not to acknowledge. I stared at him. This man who'd spent a week showing me the complexity of his empire, the good he did alongside the harm. And now I'd seen the other side, the violence and intimidation that made everything else possible. I'm not walking away, I said finally. I need to see all of it. Not just the charity and the port operations, but the whole truth, including the parts you'd rather keep hidden. Something shifted in his expression, respect, perhaps, or concern. Then you need to understand something. The next 6 months aren't just about documenting my business. They're about survival in a world that doesn't forgive weakness or mistakes. Marco isn't the only dangerous person in my organization, and they're all watching you now, assessing whether you're a threat or an asset. What do I need to do? I asked. Stay close to me, he said. Follow my lead in meetings. Don't ask questions that reveal information you shouldn't have. And Violet? He stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup my face with unexpected gentleness. Trust me. I know that's asking a lot given what you've seen. But if you're going to survive in my world, you need to trust that I'll protect you. I should have pulled away from his touch, maintained professional distance. But standing there in that industrial space where Marco had just demonstrated the reality of Rossini's empire, I found myself leaning into his hand, accepting the comfort of his presence despite everything it represented. I don't trust you, I whispered. But I believe you want to protect me. Is that enough? His thumb traced my cheekbone, his gray eyes holding mine with intensity that made my breath catch. For now, he murmured. It's enough for now. The moment stretched between us, charged with something dangerous and undeniable. Then his phone buzzed, breaking the spell. He checked it, his expression hardening. We need to go, he said. There's been an incident at one of my properties. Someone sending a message, and I need to respond. As we descended in the elevator, I realized that the morning's confrontation had changed everything. I'd crossed some invisible threshold from observer to participant, from journalist documenting a story, to someone embedded in the daily operations of a criminal enterprise. And most terrifying of all, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. Because somewhere in the past week, Anthony Rossini had stopped being just a subject to investigate and had become something far more complicated. Someone whose protection I craved, even as I documented his crimes. Someone whose touch I welcomed, even as I condemned his actions. I was falling for the monster I'd set out to expose. and I had no idea how to stop it.